Hey guys, tonight we are getting our hands dirty. The rain is washing the world clean outside, but in here we are building something from the earth itself. We are stepping into the medieval potter's shed. We are going to watch the hypnotic spin of the wheel and the shaping of the clay. This is a story about mud, water, and the circle. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Now, listen to the hum of the wheel and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The shed stands where the river bends. You know this place already, though you may have never been here. It exists in that liminal space between the forest and the water, between the wild and the tended. The medieval potter does not choose grand locations. He chooses proximity to resource, to clay, to water, to the constant wet that his craft demands. The roof is low and darkened by weather. The thatch has absorbed 1,000 rains, and it holds the moisture still, releasing it slowly into the air so that everything inside breathes with dampness. Tonight, the rain hammers, not violently, but with a patient, relentless rhythm that has been going on since before dawn and will continue into the darkness. The sound is all around you. It pings on the roof, 1,000 tiny bells of water striking dried grass and reed. It drips from the eaves in lines that catch what little light filters through the single window. The earth outside has softened. The path to the river has become something between ground and stream, and the potter has not ventured out since morning. There is no need. The work is here. The work is always here. Inside, the air is thick, not stifling but present. The smell of wet earth is foundational, the base note upon which everything else rests. You draw it in and feel it coating your sinuses, filling your lungs. It is the smell of life. It is the smell of things growing, of things being born from the soil. Mixed with this is the smell of damp straw scattered across the floor, straw that will soon be slick with water and clay dust, straw that cushions the footsteps of the potter as he moves across his domain. There is also the smell of the river itself, that green and mineral scent of living water, of things decomposing and being reborn in the currents. The light is grey. The window does not show you the world clearly, but rather a suggestion of the world, a watercolor impression of what exists beyond the shed's walls. The rain has blurred everything. There are no sharp lines anywhere. The boundary between inside and outside has become negotiable. Water finds its way in through the cracks in the walls, through the spaces where the wood has aged and settled. Water is not an intrusion here. Water is the medium of the work. Water is welcome. The potter is grounded. This is the feeling that settles into you as you stand here, as you become accustomed to the dimness and the damp and the endless sound of rain. You are grounded. Your feet are on earth, or on straw that covers earth. The floor of the shed is packed soil, smoothed by years of footsteps, made slightly tacky by the moisture that rises from below. You can feel through your soles the weight of the ground beneath you, the mass of the earth, its solidity and its indifference. There is something profoundly settling about this. The world above may be chaotic, the sky may be releasing its burden in a steady stream, but here, underfoot, is stability. Here is something that will not move. Here is something you can trust. The potter has been in this shed since before the rain began. He does not measure his days by the passage of hours, but by the passage of materials. There is clay, and while there is clay, there is work to do. The clay does not care that it is raining. The clay does not care that it is morning or evening, dark or light. The clay simply is, waiting in its heap against the far wall, a grey-brown mound that seems to grow out of the earth itself, as if the shed's floor is slowly pushing up offerings to be shaped. Now we must speak of the clay itself. The potter knows where to find it, and he does not go far. The river, in its constant movement, has washed materials downstream for centuries. The clay has been processed by water, broken down, refined, separated from the coarser stones and gravels. It deposits itself in the bends of the river, in the quiet pools where the current slows, in the banks where the water does its patient work of erosion and rearrangement. The potter walks to the river bank, and he digs. It is not a delicate task. The spade cuts into the soft earth. The clay comes away in chunks, heavy and reluctant, clinging to the spade as if it prefers to remain in its riverbed sanctuary. But clay must be moved. Clay must be brought into the shed, out of the chaos of the river and the unpredictable flow of water, into a space where the potter can exert his will upon it. He carries the chunks back in a wooden bucket, or in his arms, or in both, making multiple journeys as the afternoon light shifts and the quality of the air changes. Each journey to the river and back is a meditation on weight. The clay is dense. It is compressed by its own mass. A lump of clay the size of your fist weighs almost as much as a stone of the same size. Your arms feel the effort of carrying it. Your body registers the burden. The clay is cold. This is not an accident. The coldness comes from its time in the earth, from the water that saturates it, from the nights and mornings when frost would have touched its surface. The coldness is also the coldness of the clay's nature. Unfired clay has not yet been kissed by flame. It has not yet achieved the transformation that will make it permanent. For now, it exists in a liminal state, caught between water and solid, between soft and hard, and this liminality expresses itself as coldness. When you touch wet clay, it draws heat from your hands. It is a thief of warmth, and this theft is part of its charm. Your hands, which have been warm inside your clothes, suddenly discover their own temperature as they meet the cool clay. The world becomes less abstract. Your hands become real. The texture of the clay is sticky, tacky, adhesive. It clings. It does not want to let go. This is the nature of clay at its finest, this refusal to separate cleanly. There is no sharp line between where the clay ends and where your hand begins. The boundary becomes blurred. The clay begins to coat your skin, to work its way into the creases of your palms, to lodge itself in the lines that cross your hands. These lines, which are usually invisible, suddenly become visible as the clay collects in them, creating dark veins across your skin. It is as if the clay is drawing a map of you, finding the hidden topography of your hands and marking it. The color is essential. It is not brown, not really, though brown is part of it. It is a deep gray with hints of the river in it, hints of the rocks from which it was born. It is the color of water that has reflected the sky for a long time, water that has picked up minerals and sediment and become something more than simple liquid. It is the color of storm clouds and the color of time. It is not a warm color. It does not suggest clay parts or the work of craft. It is the color of the earth in its rawest state, the color of something that has not yet decided what it wants to become. Now we move into the preparation. The raw clay from the riverbank is never ready to use immediately. It contains air bubbles, trapped by the digging and transport, pockets of emptiness that will cause the finished part to crack and fail. These must be removed. The process is called wedging, and it is as much about the body as it is about the clay. The potter brings the lump to the wooden bench, a work surface that has been worn smooth by years of use, that has absorbed clay dust into its grain, that has become almost a part of the potter's body through repetition. The lump lands heavily on the bench. The impact sends vibration through the wood, through the potter's arms, into his body. This is the beginning. The lump is then pressed and rolled forward, pressed hard with the heels of the hands, using body weight to drive the pressure deep into the clay. Then the far edge is folded back toward the potter, and the motion repeats. This is the rhythm of wedging. Press and fold, press and roll, press and fold. The clay begins to take on a different quality. The surface becomes more uniform. The color becomes more consistent. The physical effort is real. The potter's shoulders and arms and back all participate in this motion. It is not delicate work. It is not the careful manipulation of precious material. It is, instead, the assertion of will over matter. The clay resists. The clay is heavy, and it wants to stay where it is, pressed into its lumpish shape, holding on to the air bubbles that came in during digging. The potter must overcome this resistance. He must push the clay against itself again and again until the air bubbles collapse, until the clay becomes homogeneous, until it achieves the consistency that will allow it to be thrown on the wheel. The wedging takes time. Minutes pass. The clay warms slightly under the friction of the work, beginning to release its coldness to the warmth of the potter's hands and the effort of his body. His breathing deepens. The repetitive motion becomes almost hypnotic. Press and fold, press and roll, over and over. The world outside continues to rain. The shed continues to hold its grey light and its smell of wet earth. But here, on the bench, something is changing. The lump of clay is being transformed from raw material into prepared medium. It is becoming ready. At last, after the time that feels both eternal and instantaneous, the clay is wedged. The surface is smooth and consistent. The density is uniform throughout. The air bubbles have been driven out by force and motion. The potter lifts the wedged lump, and it feels different in his hands. It feels more alive, more responsive, more ready to receive intention. This is the state that the clay must achieve before it can know the wheel. The wheel is the central truth of the potter's shed. It dominates the space not through size, but through presence, through the sense of potential that radiates from it. The wheel is a heavy wooden structure, built to last, built to endure the repeated stress of spinning and the weight of the work that happens upon it. The wheel head is a wooden disc, perhaps 2 feet in diameter, mounted horizontally. The flywheel is much larger, perhaps 4 feet across, and is mounted vertically beneath the wheel head, connected by an axle that runs through the entire structure. The mechanics are simple. The potter will spin the flywheel using his foot, kicking the outer edge of this massive disc again and again, imparting momentum to the system. As he kicks, his other foot controls the spin, moderating it, adjusting it, keeping it within the range that is usable for the work. This takes coordination and strength and a deep understanding of the physics of rotation. The wheel does not respond immediately to the foot. There is lag, there is drift, there is the slow development of momentum. The first kick is an assertion. The potter approaches the wheel and plants his foot on the flywheel's edge, driving downward with the whole weight of his leg and the leverage of his body. The massive disc begins to move. The motion is slow at first, reluctant, as if the wheel is testing the potter's commitment. But momentum builds. The wheel begins to hum. This hum is not loud, but it is present, a low-frequency vibration that seems to emanate from the wood itself, from the friction of the axle, from the resistance of the air being pushed out of the way by the spinning mass. The physics of the situation is profound. A heavy object once set in motion wants to continue in that motion. This is the first law of motion, and it expresses itself in the wheel's desire to keep spinning. The potter, by now standing and allowing the wheel to coast, makes small adjustments with his foot, adding tiny amounts of momentum to compensate for the friction that is slowly bringing the system to a stop. Kick, let it spin. Kick, let it spin. The rhythm develops. The potter finds the timing, the spacing, the amount of effort required to maintain a steady rotation without overdoing it, without causing the wheel to spin so fast that it becomes difficult to work with the clay. The wheel head reaches a certain speed, a certain steadiness. At this point, it is ready. The hum becomes more constant, more stable. The motion becomes so smooth that it is hard to see that the disc is moving at all, except for the slight blur of the edge and the undeniable sense of rotational energy in the space. The potter steps back from the wheel for just a moment, taking in the sight of his tool ready, prepared, waiting. Now we come to the moment of throwing. This is the moment where the wedged clay meets the spinning wheel head. The potter carries the prepared lump to the wheel, and he does not hesitate. He places the clay directly on the center of the spinning disc, pressing down with enough force to secure it against the centripetal forces that are trying to fling it outward. The clay lands with a soft sound, a minor impact that is barely audible beneath the hum of the wheel. For a moment, the clay is not centered. It is not stable. The rotating wheelhead is now carrying a wobbly lump of clay, and the wobble creates a tremor in the system, a slight irregularity in the motion. The hum of the wheel becomes uneven, but the potter is already moving, already placing his hands on either side of the clay, already beginning the process of centering. His hands are wet. He has dipped them in the water bucket before placing the clay on the wheel, and the water coats his skin, filling in the fine lines, making his hands smooth and slippery. Centering is a dialogue between the potter's hands and the spinning clay. The hands are fixed in space, and the clay is rotating beneath them, and the potter must use his hands to push the clay into a state where it is perfectly aligned with the axis of rotation. This is not a violent process, though it takes strength. It is, instead, a process of constant small adjustments, of reading the clay's response to pressure and adjusting that pressure accordingly. The physics of centering is the physics of vectors and forces. The clay wants to move outward, wants to fly away from the center due to centrifugal force. The potter's hands want to push the clay inward, want to force it to align perfectly with the axis. These opposing forces create a zone of negotiation, a space where the clay must eventually choose stability. But choice is not the right word. The clay is not choosing. The potter is forcing the clay towards stillness through the application of pressure and the steady repetition of that pressure over time. The centering can take a long time. Seconds stretch into what feels like minutes. The potter's hands are positioned on either side of the rotating clay, thumbs typically at the top, fingers on the sides. The hands are still, not moving relative to the rotating clay, and because of this stillness, the clay experiences them as a constant pressure, a constant force trying to push it inward. The wobble decreases. The clay begins to recognize the center. The motion becomes smoother. But there is resistance. The clay fights back, or seems to. There is a point in the centering where the clay will suddenly wobble more intensely, where it seems like all progress has been lost, where the potter must dig deeper, must apply more pressure, must convince the clay that resistance is futile. This is the critical moment. This is where many potters' clay flies off the wheel, flinging outward in a spectacular failure. But the experienced potter knows that this moment is necessary, knows that the clay must test his commitment before it surrenders. And so he applies the pressure, he keeps his hands still, he waits for the clay to understand. And then, suddenly it does. The wobble ceases. The clay achieves a state of perfect stillness relative to the wheelhead. It is no longer moving outward. It is no longer trying to resist. It has been brought into alignment with the center, with the axis of rotation, with the invisible line that runs through the earth and through the spinning disk and through the potter's intention. The hum of the wheel becomes pure and steady again. The tremor is gone. In this moment, there is no struggle. The clay and the wheel and the potter have become one system, perfectly balanced, perfectly centered. The centering is complete, but the work does not pause. The clay, now centered, is ready for the next phase, the opening. The potter's hands remain in contact with the clay, but their purpose changes. Now, instead of pushing the clay inward, they will work to shape the clay, to open it up, to begin the transformation from a simple mound into something with depth, something with interiority. The opening begins with the thumbs. The potter places both thumbs into the center of the spinning mound, pressing downward and slightly inward. The clay receives this pressure. It yields. The thumbs sink into the clay, and the opening begins. This is the moment of magic, and it deserves to be savored. The clay parts. It opens. The impression made by the thumbs grows larger as the wheel continues to spin, as the thumbs continue to press downward, as the clay continues to yield. What was a solid mound is becoming a hollow form. There is now an inside and an outside, a distinction that did not exist before. The walls begin to rise. This happens not because the potter is pushing them upward, but because as the thumbs press down in the center, the clay that is not being pressed down is being forced outward and upward, is being stretched by the rotation of the wheel, is being thinned by the motion of the potter's hands. The sides of the form grow taller, more defined. What was a mound is now a bowl, a cup, a vessel in its most primitive form. The opening is happening in real time, moment by moment, rotation by rotation of the wheel. The feeling is magical because the transformation is so complete, so sudden, so irreversible. The potter cannot undo this opening. The clay cannot return to its solid state. Once the thumbs have pierced the center, the form has been fundamentally changed. And yet, the potter knows that this is only the beginning. This crude open form will be refined, will be shaped, will be altered many times before it becomes the final part. But for now, for this moment, there is only the fact of opening, the reality of transformation, the magic of seeing something entirely new emerge from something entirely simple. The hands move with the clay, adjusting the thickness of the walls, ensuring that the form is even, that no part is significantly thinner than any other part. The left hand inside the form provides resistance, provides something for the outside hand to work against. The right hand outside shapes and refines, or it might be the opposite. The potter has a natural preference, a way of working that has become automatic through years of practice. The hands know what to do. They do not need to be instructed. They feel the clay, understand its current state, and make the adjustments that the form requires. The spinning wheel makes all of this possible. Without the rotation, the task of shaping clay into symmetrical forms would be vastly more difficult, would require different techniques, would be almost meditative in a different way. But with the wheel, there is a collaboration between the potter and the tool, between the human hand and the inhuman consistency of rotation. The wheel does much of the work of creating symmetry. The potter merely has to feel and respond and adjust. The water on the potter's hands is crucial to this process. As the clay spins and the hands work it, friction would build. The clay would begin to dry, to resist, to become less plastic and more brittle. But the water that coats the hands provides lubrication. It allows the hands to slide across the clay surface without catching, without creating friction that would slow the work or damage the clay. And as the hands work, the water is slowly absorbed by the clay, slowly disappears into the material, spreading moisture throughout the form. This brings us to the final moment, to the slip. The slip is liquid clay, clay mixed with water until it becomes the consistency of cream, the consistency of slip itself, and it is essential to the work. The potter's hands, as they have been working, have been gradually losing their water content. The clay has been drinking the moisture, absorbing it, leaving the potter's hands drier and drier. At some point, the friction begins to increase. The hands begin to stick slightly to the clay. The work becomes less smooth, less fluid. This is the moment when the potter reaches for the water bucket. The bucket is always near, always within arm's reach, always ready. The water inside is cool and slightly turbid, already touched by clay dust, already beginning its transformation towards slip. The potter dips his hands into this water, submerges them completely, feels the coolness close around his fingers, his palms, the backs of his hands. The water soaks in. The hands become fully saturated. The slip is the product of this water and the clay dust that has accumulated on the potter's hands and arms during the work. As the hands are pulled from the water, the slip comes with them, a thin coating of liquid clay that covers every surface, that fills every crease, that makes the hands slippery and new again. The slip is wet. The slip is beautiful. The slip is the key to continued work. The potter's hands emerge from the water, and they are transformed. They are no longer the hands that were working the clay. They are new hands, slip-covered hands, hands that are ready to continue the work without resistance, without friction. The hands return to the spinning clay, and immediately the quality of the work improves. The hands slide across the clay surface without catching. The friction has disappeared. The movement of the hands across the clay becomes liquid, becomes smooth, becomes almost effortless in comparison to what came before. The squelching sound that accompanies this moment is not overstated in its importance. It is the sound of slip, of water, of the successful lubrication of the process. It is the sound of the potter's hands moving across wet clay, the sound of materials in perfect conversation with each other, the sound of work proceeding without resistance. The sound changes the mood of the work, brightens it, makes it feel less like struggle and more like play, less like effort and more like inevitability. The slip continues to coat the potter's hands as he works. It is continuously being worked into the clay by the rotation of the wheel, continuously being absorbed by the thirsty material. The clay is drinking the water, and the water is being replaced by more water from the slip on the hands, and the slip is being replaced by fresh slip from the continued dipping in the water bucket. This cycle could continue indefinitely, or at least until the pot is finished, until the form is complete, until the potter decides that enough has been done and the work on this particular vessel is complete. The rain continues outside. The shed continues to hold its grey light and its damp air. The smell of wet earth and straw continues to fill the lungs of anyone present. But here, on the wheel, in the hands of the potter, in the spinning clay and the flowing water and the persistent rotation, something entirely other is happening. A form is being made. A vessel is emerging. A pot is being born from the marriage of earth and water and human intention. The work continues in this state, this rhythm, this cycle of pressure and release, of water and clay, of hands and wheel and material. The potter does not tire. The wheel does not slow. The clay does not resist. Everything is in conversation. Everything is flowing. Everything is moving toward the completion of the form, the achievement of the vessel, the realization of the potential that existed in the raw clay that was dug from the riverbank this morning or yesterday or the day before, clay that was brought here to be transformed, clay that is now in the process of becoming something entirely other than what it was. The hum of the wheel continues. The slip continues to coat the hands. The clay continues to open and rise. The potter continues to shape and refine. The rain continues to hammer on the roof. The world outside continues its cycle of darkness and light, of seasons and years, of the endless transformation of matter into new forms. And here in this shed, on this wheel, the smallest version of this transformation is happening, moment by moment, rotation by rotation, hand by hand, breath by breath. The form that has been opened now must be pulled. The pulling is the work of drawing the clay walls upward, of making the vessel taller, of creating the sense of lift and space that transforms a bowl into something more intentional. The pulling is where the true skill of the potter is revealed, where years of practice either pay off or fail entirely. There is no margin for error in the pulling. The margin is so narrow that it is almost non-existent. The hands are still slip-covered, still smooth and wet. The form is still centered, still spinning at the perfect speed, still completely ready. The potter's fingers, typically the index and middle fingers of both hands, are positioned on either side of the clay wall, inside and outside simultaneously. The hands are not gripping. Gripping would be too much pressure, would be too crude. Instead, the hands are suggesting, coaxing, gently insisting that the clay should move upward, should become taller, should transform from its current stocky squat shape into something more elegant and elongated. The pull begins with a decision. The potter must commit to the motion. Hesitation will cause the clay to wobble, will break the centering, will potentially cause the entire form to collapse into itself. So there is no hesitation. The fingers on both hands press gently inward, creating a slight compression, and then, as the wheel rotates, the hands move upward. The motion is slow. The motion is deliberate. The motion is continuous and smooth. The fingers do not jerk or stutter or vary their pressure. They simply rise, and as they rise, the clay rises with them. The clay is stretched. This is the essential process. The walls of the form, which were thick when they were first opened, are now being made thinner through the act of pulling. The clay molecules are being stretched apart, are being distributed over a larger surface area, are being made into something more delicate and more fragile. The potter can feel this stretching happening. He can feel the clay resisting the stretching, resisting the change in its shape. And then he can feel the clay yielding, surrendering to the inevitable transformation. The walls rise. They become taller with each pull, with each rotation of the wheel, with each patient application of gentle pressure and upward motion. The form is becoming a cylinder, becoming something that has height and proportion, becoming something that is beginning to look like a part in the traditional sense. The mouth of the form, the open top where the clay parted when the thumbs pressed down, is moving higher, moving farther away from the wheel head, becoming something that the potter will eventually be able to see into from above. The delicacy required cannot be overstated. The hands must be so sensitive to the clay's response that they can feel the moment when the walls are becoming too thin, when the stretching is approaching the limit, when one more pull might cause the walls to become weak enough that they will collapse or tear. The potter's hands are reading the clay like a language. The clay is communicating through the resistance it provides, through the way it responds to pressure, through the subtle variations in its texture and temperature. One wrong move means collapse. This is the knowledge that sits at the back of the potter's mind during the entire pulling process. One wrong move means the form caves inward, the symmetry breaks, the work returns to being nothing but a lump of ruined clay. This knowledge is not paralyzing, though. Instead, it is clarifying. It focuses the potter's attention entirely on the present moment, on the current pull, on the sensation in his fingers and hands and arms. There is no room for distraction. There is no room for anything except the work. The pulling continues. The potter loses count of how many times his hands have moved from the base of the form to its current height. Dozens of times, perhaps hundreds. The motion becomes almost automatic, while at the same time remaining completely conscious and present. The hands know the motion, know the pressure, know the timing, but they do not operate on autopilot. They remain connected to the clay, remain responsive to its needs, remain engaged in the dialogue between hand and earth. The form is now clearly a cylinder. It has achieved a state of proportion and elegance that suggests completion is approaching. The walls are even, the thickness is consistent, the height is appropriate to the diameter of the base. The form could be considered finished at this stage. It is a functional part, a vessel capable of holding liquid or grain or anything else. But the potter's hands do not stop. They have not yet achieved the state of perfection that they are seeking. Another pull, slower than the previous ones. The hands move more deliberately, with less pressure, with more patience. The clay is thinned further. The cylinder becomes more refined, more delicate, more precisely whatever it is that the potter is envisioning. The walls are now thin enough that light, if light could reach them, would be visible through them. The clay is in a state of dangerous fragility, but it holds. The wheel's rotation provides the support, provides the structural integrity through pure physics, through the centrifugal forces that hold the thin walls outward and prevent them from collapsing inward. This is the moment of absolute presence. The potter is entirely here, entirely now, entirely in his hands and in the clay and in the wheel. There is nothing else. The rain outside has become a distant sound. The grey light of the shed has become a distant awareness. There is only the spin, only the pull, only the upward movement of hands and the simultaneous upward movement of clay walls. And then the hands know that the pulling is complete, not because there is a fixed rule, not because the form matches a predetermined size, but because the hands can feel that the form has achieved its potential in this direction. To pull further would be to risk collapse. To pull further would be to push beyond the point where the clay can sustain itself. The hands withdraw. They rest for a moment on the spinning form, feeling the vibration of the wheel, feeling the subtle imperfections and perfections of the walls they have just created. The pulled form is now ready for the next stage. It is beautiful in its simplicity and its potential. It is a cylinder, open at the top, closed at the bottom, ready to become something more refined. The throwing is complete in the sense that the basic shape has been established. What remains is refinement, is finishing, is the bringing of the form to its final state of completion before it leaves the wheel. This is where the rib enters the work. The rib is a simple tool, a piece of wood that is shaped to fit comfortably in the potter's hand, that is smooth and hard, and designed to work against the spinning clay. The rib is used for smoothing, for refining, for removing the excess slurry that has accumulated on the surface of the pot during the pulling process. The slurry is that mixture of clay and water that has been expelled from the clay walls during all the previous stages of work. It is rough, it is irregular. It creates a surface that is not uniform, that catches the light, that is textured and uneven. The rib is brought to the spinning form. The potter has dried his hands slightly, removing some of the excess water, so that the rib can be held with security and control. The rib is positioned against the outside of the cylinder, held at a slight angle, held with enough pressure that it will remove material, but not so much pressure that it will gouge or tear the clay. The motion is smooth and continuous, moving from the base of the pot toward the mouth, scraping away the slurry, smoothing the surface, revealing the clay that lies beneath. The scraping is audible. The sound is a soft scraping, a gentle rasping noise that indicates that material is being removed, that change is happening, that the surface of the pot is being transformed. The slurry that is scraped away falls to the wheel head or falls away entirely, returning to the chaos that lies outside the pot's walls. With each pass of the rib, the surface becomes smoother, becomes more uniform, becomes more refined. The rib tool is moved from base to mouth. Again and again, each pass removing a thin layer of slurry, each pass making the surface incrementally smoother. The potter's attention is focused on feeling the surface beneath the rib, on sensing the moment when the slurry has been fully removed, on judging when the surface has achieved the smoothness that he is seeking. The rib becomes an extension of his hand, becomes a way for his hand to sense the clay at a distance through the mediation of the tool. Glass smooth is the goal, and glass smooth is what is achieved. The surface of the pot is now so smooth that if light were to reflect off it, the reflection would be clear and undistorted. The surface catches no light, though, because the surface is wet with the remaining slip, with the water that has been drawn up from the depths of the clay by the friction and pressure of the rib tool. The wetness makes the surface appear to glow, makes it appear to hold a kind of internal luminosity that is entirely its own. The rib is set aside. The pot is complete in its form. It is no longer a shape that is being worked, that is in the process of becoming. It has achieved its final form on the wheel. What remains now is the separation, the cutting away of the pot from the wheel head to which it has been attached since the moment the clay was first placed there. The wheel continues to spin. The pace of the rotation has perhaps slowed slightly, or perhaps it has remained the same. The potter's attention to such details has faded. What matters now is the separation. The potter reaches for the cutting wire, a simple tool consisting of a thin string or wire held taut between two handles, or sometimes held in the potter's hands directly with a small amount of slack in the middle. The wire is positioned beneath the pot, beneath the base where it joins with the wheel head. The wheel continues to spin. The potter holds the wire steady, and then, with a motion that is smooth and deliberate, the wire is drawn beneath the pot, is moved through the clay at the point where the pot meets the wheel. The wire cuts. It does not tear, does not rip, does not create ragged edges. It cuts cleanly through the soft clay, separating the pot from its attachment to the wheel head. The satisfaction of this moment is profound. The pot, which has been held in place by nothing but the pressure of the potter's hands and the centrifugal force of the spinning wheel, is now free. The wire has accomplished this freedom. The pot is no longer part of the wheel. It is entirely itself, entirely separate, entirely ready for what comes next. The wheel continues to spin, but it spins empty now, spins without the burden of clay, spins in a state of potential for whatever will be thrown next. The pot is removed carefully. The hands slide beneath it, supporting it, cradling it, lifting it away from the wheel head. The pot is heavier than it appears. It contains the mass of the clay and the mass of the water that saturates the clay. It is fragile despite its weight. The hands must be gentle, must not squeeze or compress the walls. The pot is carried to a shelf, to a place where it will rest and begin the long process of drying. The shelf is filled with pots already. Rows of them, arranged carefully, given space between them so that air can flow around them, so that each pot can dry at its own pace. The pots are all grey, all the same basic shade of damp clay. The pots are all slightly different from one another, all bearing the unique marks of the potter's hands, all reflecting the subtle variations in how they were thrown, how they were pulled, how they were refined. But in the dimness of the shed, they appear almost identical, almost like a small population of grey vessels waiting for their transformation. The newly finished pot is placed on the shelf with the others. It is still wet, still soft, still completely malleable and vulnerable. It will remain here, on this shelf, for days. The drying must happen slowly. This is essential. The potter understands the physics of drying. Water, as it evaporates from clay, creates stresses within the material. If the drying happens too quickly, if the outside becomes dry while the inside remains wet, the uneven stresses will cause the pot to crack and warp. The cracks will run through the walls, will render the pot useless, will break it into pieces that cannot be repaired. So the drying must be patient. The drying must be gradual. The drying must be allowed to happen at the pace that the clay requires, not at the pace that impatience would demand. This is where craft becomes philosophy. This is where the potter learns that some things cannot be rushed, that some processes require time, that the only way to achieve a successful outcome is to accept the timeline that the work itself requires. Days pass. The rain continues sometimes, and sometimes it ceases. The shed remains damp, remains humid, remains in that state of consistent moisture that is perfect for the slow drying of thrown pots. The pots on the shelf gradually release their water. The water evaporates from the surface, moves through the clay walls, and rises into the air of the shed, adding to the humidity, adding to the sense of moisture that pervades everything. The pots become slightly lighter as they lose their water. The color changes subtly, becomes slightly paler, becomes slightly more consistent in tone. The pots are becoming harder, becoming more leather-hard, the state between soft clay and completely dry clay, where the material is firm enough to handle, but still contains enough moisture that it has not yet become brittle. At this stage, the pots could still be damaged, could still be broken, but they are much more resistant to damage than they were when they were newly thrown. The patience continues. Days become a week, perhaps. The pots are not touched. They are not moved. They are not examined closely. They are left alone to do the work of drying, to release their moisture at the pace that is appropriate, to prepare themselves for the next stage of transformation. The potter walks past them regularly, checking their status, noting which ones are drying faster and which ones more slowly, but he does not interfere. Patience is the virtue of the potter. And then the drying is complete. The pots have released most of their water. They are now bone dry, or nearly so. They are hard. They ring with a clear tone when tapped gently. They are no longer fragile in the way that newly thrown pots are fragile. They are hard enough to handle, hard enough to move, hard enough to survive the stress of being stacked and packed and loaded into the kiln. But they are not yet finished. They have not yet achieved the transformation that will make them permanent, that will make them capable of holding liquid without absorbing it, that will make them into true ceramic vessels. The kiln is at the back of the shed. It is a structure of brick and clay, built to last, built to withstand repeated heating and cooling cycles. It is a massive oven, essentially, designed not to bake bread, but to fire clay, to apply heat so intense that it causes chemical changes to occur in the ceramic material. The kiln is made of the same clay that the potter throws on the wheel. is built from the same material that the parts themselves are made from. The kiln is self-made, self-maintained, a part of the potter's craft as surely as the wheel is. The loading of the kiln is a careful process. The dry parts must be arranged inside the chamber in such a way that heat can circulate around them, can reach all surfaces, can ensure that the firing happens evenly. The parts are not placed randomly. They are stacked, nested one inside another in some cases, arranged so that they fit within the space without touching each other. A part that touches another part during firing will bond to the other part, will fuse with it, will become inseparable from it. This must be avoided. The parts are carried to the kiln and handed or passed to the potter or his assistant who is inside, who is arranging them in the proper configuration. The loading takes time. The kiln has a limited capacity. Only so many parts can fit inside, only so many parts can be fired in a single firing. The decisions about which parts to fire together are based on considerations of size, shape, thickness, and the potter's intuition about which pieces are ready to be fired at the same time. As the loading continues, the interior of the kiln fills with parts. The parts are grey, all the same tone, all the same material. They are arranged in rows, in tiers, creating a landscape of vessels inside the kiln chamber. Some parts are placed on shelves that have been installed inside the kiln. Other parts are placed directly on the floor of the kiln. The arrangement is three-dimensional, is sculptural in its own way, is organized according to principles that have been developed over centuries of potters working with fire and clay. The loading is complete when the kiln is full, when no more parts can fit without violating the spacing requirements, when every available space is utilized. The door of the kiln is then sealed. It is sealed with clay, with a mixture of clay and sand that will harden as it dries, that will seal the door against the heat that is about to be applied. The seal is not permanent. It will be broken when the kiln has cooled enough to be opened. But for now, it creates a barrier between the interior of the kiln and the outside world. The fire is built now. Wood is the fuel. Wood is stacked in the firebox, in the chamber at the base of the kiln where the heat is generated. The wood is arranged in a way that will allow it to burn efficiently, that will create a flame that rises up through the kiln chamber, that will carry heat around the parts, that will raise the temperature inside the kiln to the point where clay undergoes its transformation. The first flames are tentative. The wood catches slowly, hesitantly, as if it is not entirely sure that it wants to burn. But once the initial combustion begins, the fire strengthens. The flames grow larger. The heat begins to build. The potter is present at the kiln during this entire process. He is feeding wood into the firebox, maintaining the flame, ensuring that the temperature is rising steadily and evenly. The temperature inside the kiln is not measured with instruments in this medieval context. It is measured with the potter's eyes, with his knowledge of how the kiln behaves, with his understanding of the colors that the pots turn as the temperature increases. The firing is a dialogue between the potter and the fire, between the human operator and the physical processes of combustion and heat transfer. The potter must learn to read the kiln, to understand its moods, to anticipate its needs, and adjust his actions accordingly. The heat increases, the fire burns, the wood is consumed, is transformed into flame and heat and smoke and ash. The smoke rises up through the kiln chamber, carrying heat with it, surrounding the parts, penetrating into the parts, slowly causing the temperature inside the parts to rise. The parts absorb the heat. The clay inside the parts begins to change. Chemical bonds begin to break. Molecular structures begin to rearrange. Water molecules that are trapped inside the clay begin to be expelled. The clay begins its transformation from soft, breakable material into something harder, more permanent, more truly ceramic. The color of the parts begins to change. The gray begins to warm. It becomes tinged with orange. The warmth is visible now from outside the kiln if the door were opened, if one could see inside. The parts are glowing. The chamber is becoming a furnace. The heat is becoming intense, is becoming almost incomprehensible in its magnitude. The potter maintains the fire. The wood continues to burn. The temperature continues to rise. Red begins to appear. The parts are now glowing red, a dark red, deep and rich and full of intensity. The parts are hot, so hot that if they were touched they would cause severe burns, so hot that the air above them shimmers with distortion. The fire continues to burn. The temperature continues to rise. The potter feeds more wood into the firebox. The heat must reach a certain point, must reach a temperature that is specific to the clay being fired, must reach the point where the clay's transformation is complete. Orange appears. The red becomes brighter, becomes more orange, becomes the color of flames themselves. The parts are glowing orange now, and the glow is visible, is tangible, is almost alive in its intensity. The inside of the kiln is now like a world unto itself, a world of pure heat and light, a world where the normal rules of the cold world outside have been suspended. The clay is transforming. The transformation is irreversible. The parts are no longer breakable in the old way. They are hardening. They are becoming ceramic. The peak temperature is reached. The potter knows when this moment arrives. The colors tell him. The heat tells him. The way the flames behave tells him. The peak temperature is held for a time, is maintained, is allowed to soak into every part of every part. The heat penetrates to the center of the thickest walls. The chemical transformations occur throughout the entire mass of each part. The process is complete when the potter decides it is complete, when his knowledge and experience tell him that the transformation has gone far enough, that the parts have achieved the hardness and the permanence that they require. The fire is allowed to die down. The wood is no longer fed into the firebox. The flames diminish. The heat, which has been so intense, begins to release. The temperature inside the kiln begins to fall, but the kiln does not cool quickly. The heat is stored in the massive brick walls, is held in the clay material that makes up the kiln's structure. The cooling takes time. It takes many hours. It may take a day or more for the kiln to cool enough that it can be opened, enough that the parts inside can be removed without the risk of breakage from thermal shock. The potter does not leave the kiln during this time. He tends to it. He sits near it, feeling the heat radiate from it, watching as the color of the glow inside the kiln gradually fades, gradually diminishes, gradually returns to the neutral gray of the clay. Hours pass. The heat becomes less intense. The glow becomes less bright. The kiln is slowly returning to the world of normal temperatures, normal light, normal existence. The transformation of the parts is complete. What remains is the revelation, the moment when the door is opened and the nature of the transformation is revealed. The cooling continues. The kiln is cool enough now to be touched, though it is still warm, still releasing heat, still in the process of returning to ambient temperature. The sealing clay that was applied to the door is still in place. The potter breaks it away, scrapes it off, removes the seal that has held the door closed. The clay crumbles in his hands, has hardened into something almost like stone, has been baked by the heat of the kiln, has become part of the firing process. The door swings open. The interior of the kiln is visible now. The parts inside are no longer grey. They are warm terracotta, a rich orange-brown color that is entirely different from the grey of the unfired clay. The transformation is complete and visible and unmistakable. The parts have been remade. They are no longer the same material that they were before. They are harder, they are permanent, they are ceramic in the truest sense. The unloading is careful, is slow, is respectful of the parts and of the work that has been done to create them. The parts are still hot, still releasing heat, still warm to the touch if handled carefully. They are removed one by one, are taken out of the kiln chamber, are placed on a surface where they can continue to cool. As they cool, they contract slightly. If they were cooled too quickly, if they were removed from the heat too suddenly, they would crack. But the slow cooling in the open air is allowing them to contract evenly. is allowing the stress to be distributed throughout the material rather than concentrated in any particular location. The parts are examined as they cool. The color is rich and warm, is beautiful in the way that only fired clay can be beautiful. The surface is hard. When a part is tapped, it rings, it produces a clear tone, a bell-like sound that indicates hardness, that indicates the successful completion of the firing process. The sound is musical, is pleasant, is entirely different from the dull thud that would have resulted from tapping the unfired part. The parts are now ready for use. They will hold water. They will hold grain. They will hold whatever the village needs them to hold. They are no longer breakable in the way that clay is breakable. They are durable. They will last for years, for decades, perhaps for centuries. The transformation from raw clay to finished ceramic vessel is complete. The work of the day is done. The rain has stopped. The grey light of the shed has faded into the darkness of evening. The wheel, which was spinning in the morning, has been still for hours. The kiln, which was burning with intense heat, has cooled to a manageable warmth. The shed is settling into the rhythm of the evening, is preparing for the night. The potter makes his way to the water bucket. The bucket that has been his companion throughout the day, that has supplied the water for the slip, that has been constantly at hand for the work, is now his final tool. He dips his hands into the water. The water is cool, is clean compared to the water that has been in contact with clay all day, has become grey from the accumulated clay dust that has settled into it over the course of the day's work. The potter washes his hands. The clay that has accumulated on them, that has been driven into the creases and crevices, that has become almost a second skin, is washed away. The water turns grey. The grey grows darker and thicker as more and more clay particles are released from his hands, as the accumulated dust of the day is washed away. The water becomes murky, becomes almost opaque, becomes thick with the material that has been suspended in it. The washing is gentle, is meditative, is a kind of ritual that marks the transition from work to rest. The potter is consciously releasing the day, is consciously allowing the intensity of focus that has been required all day to begin to dissipate. The hands are clean now, or clean enough, are free of the clay that has been their constant companion. The work is truly done. The shed is quiet. The sound of the water dripping has ceased because the rain has stopped. The hum of the wheel is gone because the wheel is still. The crackling of the kiln fire is gone because the kiln has cooled. What remains is silence, or something close to silence, the natural sounds of the evening, the sounds of the world settling into darkness. The shed is full of vessels now. The parts that have been fired are arranged on surfaces, are waiting to be collected by whoever has commissioned them, by whoever has paid for them, by whoever needs them for their own purposes. The parts that are drying are still on the shelves, still in the process of becoming, still waiting for their transformation in the kiln. The parts that are being planned exist only in the potter's mind, exist as potential, exist as the work that will be done in the days and weeks to come. The potter looks around his domain. The shed is his world. The clay is his material. The wheel is his tool. The fire is his partner. The water is his medium. Everything that he is, everything that he has learned, everything that he understands about transformation and permanence and the physical laws that govern the world is expressed in the work that surrounds him. The parts are the manifestation of his knowledge, his skill, his patience, his understanding of time and material, and the processes that connect one to the other. The day is complete. The night is coming. The potter will rest soon, will sleep in his home or in a room adjacent to the shed, will allow his body and his mind to recover from the intense focus and physical effort of the day. Tomorrow, there will be more clay to dig from the riverbank, if it is needed. Tomorrow, there will be more parts to throw, if the clay is available. Tomorrow, there will be more water to carry, more pushing and pulling, more transformation of raw material into useful form. But for now, in this moment, the work is done. The shed is full of parts, both finished and in progress. The wheel is silent. The fire is cooling. The water in the bucket is grey with clay, is resting, is waiting to be emptied and refilled with clean water for the next day's work. The potter is standing in his shed, surrounded by the evidence of his craft, surrounded by the vessels that he has made, surrounded by the transformation that he has wrought upon the earth itself. The rain has stopped. The world outside the shed is settling into stillness, is preparing for the night, is preparing for the darkness that will cover everything until the light returns. The shed, too, is settling. It is settling into silence. It is settling into the waiting that follows work. It is settling into the knowledge that the transformation of clay into vessel is complete, that the cycle has been fulfilled, that the process has reached its natural conclusion. And as the kiln cools down and the clay sets for the night, the shed stands silent, filled with the vessels that will hold the village's harvest. The work is done, and you are safe. Sleep well.